You've just downloaded Kwirtmak pre-scene, and now you're wondering where to even start. The strategic case study takes everything you've built on operational and management level and pushes it even further. You're still playing a role, but now you're a senior finance manager, reporting directly to the board, advising on decisions that will define the company's future. And that shift in seniority, it changes everything about how you write your answers. A lot of students that come into SCS still keep on writing like as if they were in operational or management level. Like listing points, although, by the way, you shouldn't do that because CIMA doesn't like when you list points. Okay, so if you are just like putting it out there, applying models, describing what's happening, the examiner at this level is looking just for something different. They want commercial judgment. They want strategic thinking. They want to feel like they are reading a memo or an email from someone who actually works in Kwirtmak. And that's what this video is about. Nisha, our SCS tutor, walks you through part 1 of our pre-scene, the industry, your role, the strategic context that you need to know from day one. Then we talk about your role and the core competencies according to the latest 2026 CIMA models. Then Pete, another tutor, will walk you through the exam structure so you know exactly what to expect. And then we finish with 4 key exam triggers: risk valuation and cybersecurity, then business valuation, and we finish with evaluating strategic options, SAF. So you know exactly what type of questions to prepare for and how to answer them. If you want the complete pre-scene analysis, all parts, full mock exams, tasks, model answers, and Nisha's feedback, everything is at practicetestacademy.com/SCS, link in the description. But for now, let's get your notes ready and over to Nisha.
Welcome to the May and August 2026 Strategic Case Study. So the hypothetical company is Kwirtmak Group. So this company is a commercial 3D printer manufacturer. So we will go through the pre-scene in depth. We'll understand some of the key aspects of your pre-scene, both related to the industry, related to the company operations, financials. And this is actually the main document you need to refer to when you prepare for the exam in terms of understanding your pre-scene for the May and August 2026 case study sessions. Now, alongside this, I do encourage you to also go through your pre-scene, but this document is prepared to be as comprehensive as possible to cover key areas from your pre-scene. So we will do the industry company analysis. We'll look at the financial statements. Then in addition, we have done the ratio analysis for you. We do a simple competitor benchmarking with our closest competitor. And then part E, we will do a quick technical dive in. We'll look at certain exam triggers. Now, one thing I want to emphasize and set the tone right from the beginning is you are in the strategic level. You're a senior finance manager. You report directly to the board. So remember, your answers, your approach for this case study right from the beginning needs to be strategically focused. You can't have an operational perspective. Rather, your judgment, your expertise should be that of a senior finance professional. You need to not just understand numbers, but you need to be able to interpret these numbers commercially. So that is what we're going to learn. That is what we're going to train for, both through this pre-scene analysis videos as well as through the rest of the course. So let's jump into the first part of your pre-scene, which is the introduction and your role. Now your role, you're a senior finance manager. You report directly to the board. The company is Kwirtmak Group. So from now on until your exam window begins and you sit for your case study, I want you to assume or to believe, to put on the persona of an actual employee of the company. So this is the company you work for. Kwirtmak Group, it's quoted manufacturer of commercial 3D printers built to customer specification. You are in England, a developed country with a well-regulated stock exchange. The currency is the dollar. Financial statements are prepared using IFRS, and you have the Inland Stock Exchange with full corporate governance obligations, shareholder accountability, and so on. So remember, again, repeating myself, you are a strategic business partner at this level. You've reached high levels in this company, so your answers have to be strategic in focus. You're not just helping with day-to-day matters, but you're advising the board on decisions. You're helping Kwirtmak achieve a competitive position, financial resilience, and long-term value. So, for an example, when you asked a question on risk, you don't just give risk, rather you evaluate the risk based on the strategic impact to the company. You evaluate it from a perspective of how it's going to affect the overall competitive position, shareholder value of the company. You don't just simply give a risk, explain the risk. So your answers have to be more polished, more refined to add value. So with that in mind, we can jump into the rest of your pre-scene analysis. So remember, you're a strategic partner, so your answers can align with a lot of E3-based strategic principles. You work in a listed company, so you need to keep up with corporate governance guidelines, shareholder accountability, and IFRS framework of reporting. So let's first look in this video at the industry itself. Now remember, you're not expected to be a technical expert in this industry. You're not expected to be a technical expert, but given that you work in this industry and also to do a fairly decent job when it comes to your answers, it's good to have some understanding on the industry. Now, I am not an expert in 3D printing industry myself. So what I encourage you to do, and what I would be doing as your tutor as well, is gathering knowledge through the days. If you aren't well acquainted with this industry, we never know, some of you might be. But if you aren't, spend time getting that knowledge in a very non-pressurizing way. So what you can do days leading up to the exam, watch YouTube videos of, for an example, simple videos. What is 3D printing? How does 3D printing work? What are the applications of 3D printing? Maybe you can go through, especially as we put out the industry analysis, that's a separate video. There'll be actual real world 3D printing companies. Look at the websites, of real world companies. So basically, educate yourselves in a very passive way. You don't have to get into an in-depth knowledge. You're not having to get into this industry in big detail, but you need to understand the basics. And you would see in your pre-scene, your examiner knows this, and that's why your examiner has given you these basics in a very digestible format. So we'll go through these basics together now. So one is, what is 3D printing? So 3D printing can also be called additive manufacturing. So this is where you build a physical object layer by layer from computer generated design. So actually 3D printing is a lot to do with, it's technological, it's not traditional manufacturing. You're not simply, for an example, taking, if you think of a carving of something, you don't simply take a block and carve it. Rather, you build the block through each piece. So you're not removing, it's not subtractive manufacturing, but it's adding to the block, material by material. So this makes 3D printing have many advantages. One is, of course, it is flexible, fast, and it's very efficient and good for complex shapes, bespoke items, and one-off parts. So that's the key strength. As we will go on, you would see 3D printing is not something ideal for mass production, low cost production. But 3D printing is good when you want something very fast, you want it, it's quite complex, it's maybe one-off. 3D printing, that is the niche of 3D printing. That would be the niche of 3D printing. So why is this important? This helps you identify our core clientele. So we manufacture 3D printers, that is the business we are in, 4 different technologies. So 3D printers, currently there are 4 different technologies, and we produce 3D printers in all 4 of these technologies. Our customer segments range from aerospace to automotive to consumer electronics to jewelry, and I think even to medical in the future. So these are the customer segments. So we both sell the printers as well as we have recurring revenue from sales of the material used to print. So it's like we are selling the ink. If you think of just a printer, we are selling the ink and the printer. Similarly, we sell the materials that go into printing, and this gives us recurring revenue apart from selling the 3D printer itself. So, removing all complexity of the industry, simply we are a manufacturer. We manufacture 3D printers. We sell them to those who want 3D printers. There are 4 different technologies that 3D printers are built with. We produce printers in all 4 of these technologies. Our key customer segments operate in different industries. Next, how does the 3D printing process work? Simple terms. First, now this is the process. This is nothing to do with what we do, but this is how do you do 3D printing, just to get a knowledge. So a customer who buys our 3D printer will first have to create a 3D digital model. There'll be a 3D digital model of the object using computer-aided design of what they want to produce. Or simply they can even use a physical object if they have and scan it to get a 3D scan of what they want to produce. So that's the first aspect. You need to design what you want printed. After designing, the 3D printer now uses their software to divide this 3D model into hundreds or thousands of extremely small horizontal layers. So it breaks down this 3D model into small pieces in a sense. It's like you're basically removing components of something. But remember, it's very small. It's thinner than human hair. Then you come to the third stage, which is actually printing. Now this is where the slicing that was done, the design, then the slicing that was done is incorporated. And now the little thousands of extremely thin horizontal layers are built together layer by layer and printed. So each layer bonds to the other and creates that whatever you are printing. So of course, depending on what's printing, depending on the printer technology, it will differ. But simply, that's what happens. Then after printing, you have post-processing. That means most often there is a bit of finishing that has to be done. For an example, you might need to use UV curing to harden whatever the materials you have put. Some things that are water soluble might need to be, there may be certain, so it's just additional, maybe a heat treatment or something to firmly establish the structure. Because remember, 3D printing is, most times we're creating some kind of a structure. So the post-processing creates the supporting structure and puts it all together. So remember that this is a very key point. It's a key quality control point, a common source of failure. And it's very important, especially as we go on. You would see that in the aerospace, medical applications, there are risks with using 3D printing. It's very applicable, but there are risks, because if you're in the sky and one of the 3D printing aspects fail, it means human lives. Similarly, medical applications, you put it into a body, adverse reactions, human life. So there is high risk in these applications. So therefore, you need to make sure that your post-processing is done. It's in effect something like quality control, making sure that what you printed is fit for use. So it's making sure what you printed is fit for use, right? Now, how can we compare 3D printing with traditional printing? So simply put, we don't need to go through this table in very big detail. So traditional manufacturing is simply, you know how it's done. Most of us know, we just manufacture something through machines and so on. Components are manufactured, they are attached. Now, 3D printing is very good for prototypes. For an example, you want to come up with a new product. You want to see how good this product will be, the feasibility of it, how it will stand up. 3D printing has very low prototype cost compared to traditional manufacturing, where you have to get the tools, get the machinery just to produce a prototype which might not ultimately be passed on. 3D printing is excellent for prototypes. But when it comes to mass production, we're talking about something to sell in mass scale to customers. 3D printing has high per unit cost. Why? Because in 3D printing, you don't produce we're not talking about an assembly line. We're talking about per unit customization. So because it's per unit customization, 3D printing is not cost efficient. So that's clear. If it's mass production, 3D printing is out of the window. Complexity of design, 3D printing has no limits. You can create complex designs, which is good. Whereas if you think of traditional manufacturing, can be constrained by what is part of our machinery. Customization is no problem when it comes to 3D printing, no extra cost, whereas it's expensive with traditional manufacturing. Material waste is minimum in 3D printing, can be very high with traditional manufacturing. Speed is very high, so high speed in 3D printing, low speed in traditional manufacturing. Minimum order quantity is 1. There's no minimum batch size, but generally traditional manufacturing, there is a batch size. So the conclusion of the matter is 3D printing is good for prototyping when the design is complex and with customization. But if you're talking about mass production, low cost of producing, high volumes, traditional manufacturing wins. So therefore, this is understanding it's important because it's understanding our key customer dynamic. So we don't If we are thinking of getting new customers, getting new clients, pitching it to traditional manufacturing is not effective. Mass scale manufacturing is not effective because 3D printing has different applications. Now moving on to the technology. So remember we said we produce printers in the 4 printer technologies. Now the 4 printer technologies have they generally are basically technologies that match different materials, different accuracy requirements, and different customer specifications. That is what it is in simple terms. So for an example, you think of something like dental application in the medical. The materials you use would be very different to what you might use for some other application. Or materials you would use for aerospace, which needs to be heavy metal that is resistant to low temperatures, will be different to something else. So that's where these technologies also differ. It's based on the material that's used and the customer application. So we have extrusion printers. So extrusion printers, a good example for this is if you think of, you might see a big plastic model, for an example, of a tooth on a shelf when you're sitting in a dentist's waiting room. It's just a model of a tooth. No one cares how it is. It's just a big, cheap, functional model. Now that's a good example for extrusion. So extrusion is where you use things like plastic. You feed it into a nozzle. It's good for prototypes, so functional prototypes. It's not really the best for actual application sometimes, but it's really good for large or functional plastic. It's good for large or functional plastic. Large, or we can say functional plastic used for, I would say, prototypes. That is the key thing for extrusion. It's very good to create prototypes. Whereas you have SL and DLP, they are good for accuracy and appearance. They are good for accuracy and appearance. A good example of this is actually now if you think of it, the actual crown you would put on that would go inside the mouth of the dental client. It has to fit perfectly, it has to feel smooth, it has to sit flush against your gums. You can't just produce it. It has to have correct appearance, correct accuracy. So for that, something like the SL or DLP would be good. So that's why it's very good for medical applications, so for high accuracy use for dental prosthetics, fine jewelry. So it's very intricate in its application. So it's good for the actual crown in dental. In dental application. Whereas this was the prototype tooth. Then if you look at laser melting. Now laser melting is good for large or functional. Laser melting is good for strength and metal. It's good for strength and metal. So I would say strength and metal. So when you talk about strength and metal, what can you immediately think of? Maybe an aircraft, the aeronautical space, aircraft components. Or you think of automotive hardware, luxury vehicle automotive hardware. So the important thing is it will give you the needed strength and the metal when it comes to laser melting. So therefore you can see it will use metals. Then you have multi-jet printing or material jetting. So this is good for color, ceramics or multi-material things. So you want to use multi-material, so you will say color, to add color, ceramics or we can say multi-material application. So a good example for this is assuming a product design team is trying to pitch a new cordless, maybe a drill or something to a client. So they need a prototype. So this is again for prototypes. It should look and feel the exact same. So material jetting can print it simply. Binder jetting, full color prototypes if we want to get an architectural model. This will be quite good. So we can use ceramic objects as well in this. So this is good. So this is a general idea of the different technologies. So we have extrusion, good for prototypes. SL or DLP, accuracy and appearance. So in the very good for small integrate things. Laser melting, good for metals and strength. Multi-jet printing, good for things like where you want to give precision color. Again, for prototypes. So what are the materials that go into this? So remember at Kwirtmak, we also sell these materials. We also offer these materials used in the printer. So this is actually what gives us recurring revenue. That's something to remember. It's like a traditional printer. You sell the printer and the ink, or you think of a razor and a blade. You get that recurring income from the material. Of course, customers are not required to buy it from us, but most buy because they feel that the quality, the compatibility is guaranteed. So the important thing we need to remember is we need to make sure it is guaranteed. We need to make sure it is guaranteed. So quality it is. So we have to make sure that quality aspect is there. So we have different materials and different printer types can use this material. So extrusion printers will use things like nylon, ABS, PLA. So remember, PLA is very good with sustainability, recyclability. Then aluminium, a lot of these metals can be used in laser melting generally. Ceramics, multiple types can use it. So what you need to remember is, of course, you can remember the key properties. Where are they used at? So main applications of each of these and the sustainability note. And what risks does it bring to us? Because remember, if we are providing these materials, these risks also come to us. For an example, you think of cobalt chrome. There is a mineral risk. It's hard. Supply chain, consistent supply chain might be hard. So how do we provide this to our customers? Especially if you think of medical applications, this seems important. So how each of these materials can create specific supply chain risk to us. Now, why do customers want 3D printers? What's the benefit? Why would our customers want a 3D printer? Because remember, 3D printers are expensive. It's very high cost to buy commercial 3D printers. But the reason is because there are significant benefits of it. One is, if you think of prototyping something before you can produce, remember, you can prototype something really fast at low cost compared to traditional manufacturing. Next, on-demand manufacturing. You can quickly manufacture something. So especially spare parts for the aerospace customers. Time is very important to make sure you are not losing on income. Then geometric freedom. You think of certain shapes that are impossible with conventional methods can be made using 3D printing. Customization without extra cost. If you have to customize something, excellent 3D printing. Then to print it at the point of use without having to transport. So minimize transport cost. And of course, material cost is also minimized. So this is your pre-scene point at where your industry analysis stops. Now, I think this is more than enough. Of course, we will be giving you more in your industry analysis, which will be useful. But this gives you a good idea on the industry. what is the industry, what do we produce, what are the 4 technological types of 3D printers. I gave you examples. What are the materials that go into these 3D printers? Who are our key customer segments? So if you look at it from your key papers, your P3, E3, F3, remember that if you think about 3D printing as a part of the industry, it's an industry that's in the growth phase. But even within the growth phase, when you talk about customer segments, application to different customer segments, there are different paces. For an example, if you think of medical implants, the segment is still maybe even in introduction. Whereas certain other industries might be more established when it comes to 3D printing. Then if you look at Porter's 5 forces, we are one among 8 major global manufacturers. So there is quite high rivalry. We depend on specialist material. Our suppliers are likely to have a high power. Our customers are sophisticated buyers. No ordinary person is going to buy a 3D printer generally because of this high cost. So our buyers will have moderate to high power because they are likely large B2B clients. Barriers to entry to the industry is high because you need to have the capital, the expertise and even certifications to develop 3D printers because of their applications. Substitution threat is low because of its core abilities and its differences compared to traditional printers traditional manufacturing. If you look at quality risk, remember, especially with aerospace and medical 3D, quality is paramount because if quality is not maintained, whether it's a defect in our 3D printer we sell or the material we sell. So this comes from 2 risks on our end. It can be either the 3D printer or it can be the material we sell to our clients. If one of these is faulty, now you can have a loss of life. Then if you look at F3, 3D printers are expensive to manufacture. So that's why we have a lot of property, plant and equipment. The financial aspect is quite high. And of course, selling materials give us a recurring revenue. They are printed repeatedly they are purchased repeatedly over a printer's life. So this creates, to an extent, revenue stability and helps offset volatility of maybe equipment sales. So these are some key triggers from your industry section. Now in our next video, let's focus on Kwirtmak itself. Where was it established? And we'll look at its mission, vision, and values.
Hey there. So you're gearing up for this CIMA Strategic Case Study exam, the final hurdle. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself what this exam is actually testing? Because here's the thing, it's not just about what you know from the textbooks. It's really about the professional you're expected to be. So let's dive in and break down exactly who you need to become to pass. So what is your real job in this exam? Honestly, figuring this out is the key to succeeding. Because for those 3 hours, you've got to forget you're a candidate just answering questions. Nope. You're actually stepping into a very specific, high-level professional role, and every single thing you write is you performing in that role.
And let's be super clear here. This is not some academic test. It is a full-on business simulation. It's designed to see if you've got those skills that a robot can't do. We're talking about critical thinking, strategic problem solving, the stuff employers are really looking for. So the biggest key to success? You've got to stop thinking like a student and start acting like the professional they want you to be.
All right, so what is this role exactly? For the next few hours of your life, your job title is Senior Finance Manager. That's it. That's who you are. This is your persona, your mindset. Every single piece of advice you give, every report you write has to come from that perspective. You're not just crunching numbers, you are advising leadership and literally shaping the company's future.
Okay, so what does a senior finance manager actually do in this whole simulation? Well, luckily, the CIMA blueprint gives us a pretty clear job description. It breaks the role down into 5 core activities. You can think of these as the 5 pillars that hold up everything you're responsible for in this exam. Now, take a look at the weighting on this chart. It's pretty interesting, right? Each of these 5 core activities is worth almost the same amount, and that sends a really crucial message. CIMA isn't looking for someone who's just a specialist in one little area. No, they're testing to see if you're a well-rounded strategic leader who has a balanced, big-picture view of the entire business. First up, you're a strategist. And this is so much more than just reporting the numbers. You're the one using that financial data to figure out where the company should go next. We're talking about evaluating potential mergers, navigating all the chaos of digital disruption, and making sure sustainability is baked right into the company's core strategy. Okay, number 2, you've got to look beyond the company's own 4 walls. As the senior finance manager, you are the expert on the entire business ecosystem. I mean everything. Competitors, stakeholders, even big geopolitical risks. Your job is to grab the right analytical tools, make sense of all that chaos out there, and then recommend exactly how the organization needs to respond. And for your third core responsibility, you become the company's financial architect. I mean, think about it. A brilliant strategy is totally useless if you can't pay for it, right? So you're the one tasked with figuring out the absolute best way to fund the company's biggest ambitions. Everything from finding sources of capital to advising on dividend policy and even doing complex business valuations. Number 4, now you're the guardian of the organization. A huge part of your senior role is to protect the company's value. And how do you do that? By spotting and dealing with risk. And this isn't just the boring old stuff. It covers everything from financial and operational risks all the way to the really modern threats like cyber attacks and major ethical dilemmas. And finally, the 5th pillar, which really ties everything together. We're talking about integrity and governance. You're the one responsible for making sure the company operates ethically and effectively. This means you'll be recommending strong internal controls and advising the top brass on how to handle threats that come from poor governance. It's a massive responsibility. Now, you're not doing all this heavy lifting in a vacuum, right? You're not locked away in some office. A senior finance manager is actually a central hub of communication and influence. And that brings us to the next critical piece, your key relationships. I mean, just look at the scope of these partnerships. You are a key business partner to, well, pretty much everyone. The leadership teams, the board of directors, your own finance team and direct reports, other business leaders, but also partners, suppliers, customers, and other stakeholders. You're not just siloed in finance. You're advising the board, working with other managers, and even talking to people outside the company. Your role is literally defined by these relationships. And succeeding in this exam means showing you can communicate with and influence all of them, not just show off how good you are with a spreadsheet. So when you put it all together, all those responsibilities, all those relationships, it all points to one crucial thing. This exam isn't just testing what you can calculate, it's testing how you think. To really nail this, you have to adopt a very specific strategic mindset. And this right here, this is the absolute essence of that mindset. It's the journey of a true finance business partner. Look, you start with raw information, right? Data, numbers. But your real job, your value, is to transform that data into insight, to see the big picture that maybe nobody else does. And you don't stop there. You then use that insight to influence key decisions, which is what ultimately drives real, tangible impact. That journey, from just having information to actually making an impact, that is the value you bring. So you might be wondering, okay, how do I actually do that? How do I make that journey from information to impact? Well, you do it through these CGMA enabling power skills. Seriously, think of these as the engine that drives all your strategic work. Let's just take one, professional skepticism. At this senior level, that doesn't just mean questioning a number. It means questioning the core assumptions of a business model or asking if a whole strategic plan is even viable. These skills are what turn your technical knowledge into real leadership. So, you might be thinking, why? Why this intense focus on pretending to be someone? It's simple, really. It's because the exam is a direct reflection of what the real business world actually needs from its top finance leaders right now. And honestly, this quote from the blueprint just says it all. Every single one of those I can't statements we looked at earlier, the ones in the 5 pillars, they correspond directly to what real employers are looking for and what businesses need to survive and thrive. So passing this exam isn't just about ticking a box and getting a qualification.
It's about proving that you have the skills to add real strategic value from the moment you walk in the door. So there you have it. That's the complete blueprint for your role as a senior finance manager. Every single task, every challenge in this simulation is designed to forge the skills that will make you an absolutely indispensable professional. The exam hands you the job title, but the real question is, are you ready to step into that role and actually lead?
Format of the strategic case study exam is a little bit different to ones you will have seen before, as we'll see. You're still given a pre-scene pack of information that's released a few weeks before the exam. And the idea with that pre-scene is that it gives you some background on a particular business in a particular industry. It's there to prepare you for the exam day. You don't need to read around that pre-scene massively. A little bit doesn't hurt. But the purpose of that pre-scene is to make sure that everyone that goes into the case study exam is coming from the same level starting point. So when you get that pre-scene, you need to read it, understand it, get to know it, think about the issues that it suggests, and maybe think about the E, P, and F implications of the information we're being given. If there are some financial numbers given in there, which there always is, then you could do some analysis on those. But the purpose of that analysis is not to be able to splurge out a load of numbers on exam day. The analysis is there to just point to the issues that might be relevant when it comes to the real exam. Now, that real exam is 3 one-hour sections, as opposed to 4 45-minute sections that you will have seen before. Each of those sections are equally weighted. There will be several subtasks within each section. You'll notice they're called tasks, not questions. That reflects the fact that they are it's part of a work-based simulation. Each subtask can and often does examine more than one syllabus area. So you could be asked to talk about the opportunities and risks associated with something that could pull even from the E paper and the P paper, all within one subtask. Now, this next point is important. I'm no doubt you're aware of this already, but you cannot bank time. So you'll be given 1 hour for your first section. And when you move on from that section, if you move on early, you can't bank any time. So if you finish that first section in 55 minutes, you can't carry that 5 minutes forward to the next section. It's just lost. So there is no point finishing any section early. If you finish a couple of minutes early, use that couple of minutes to just polish, even if that means improving the format of what's on the screen in front of you. Formats will be required when you're answering the questions. That could be, for example, emails, memos, reports, and briefing notes, and so on. And again, that's just reflecting the fact that this is a work-based simulation. Now, it's important when you're replying, therefore, that you more or less get a format reasonably correct. So if you're doing a report, to, from, subject, date, introduction, conclusion, and sign off, make it fairly formal. But what's important is the tone. So if you're writing internal emails and memos, they will be less formal than if you're writing a report to the board, for example. So bear that in mind. Your ability to communicate effectively is being examined here. So getting the tone right and the logical flow right within the format that's required is important. You're provided with a word processor to use on the exam day, which is available for you to play with in some test software on the CIMA website. And I would recommend that when you're practicing questions, you focus on using the software on the CIMA website to make sure you're completely used to it by the time you get to the exam. You won't be asked to do any detailed calculations. In fact, you may be asked to do no calculations at all on the day. The detailed calculations have already been examined in the OT papers. So you might be asked to interpret some calculations, talk about what they mean, or critique the assumptions behind them, or talk about some of the non-financial consequences of those calculations and so on. But there won't be much in the way of detailed calculations. I'm not saying leave your calculator at home. Never hurts to have a calculator nearby. But it's unlikely that you'll need to use it much, if at all, in the exam. Equally, you're provided with standard tables, present value, cumulative present value, normal distribution tables, but it's rare that you actually need to use them.
But now let's focus on specific common questions you can expect based on your pre-scene. So one of the most common areas based on your syllabus is risk-related questions. P3 is all about risk evaluation, internal controls related risk relating to cybersecurity, reputational risk. So you might be given a lot of risk. A new risk might be introduced in your unseen to you. You might be given a new development. Maybe you will be given information on why our revenue decreased. You might be told about a cyber attack, a major quality failure. So whether this is a new risk, whether this risk has materialized, your role might be, first of all, to evaluate the risk, to recommend how the board should respond. So it depends on what the subtask is asking, or perhaps advise the board on the immediate priorities and the longer term risk management changes. And then whether a particular risk should be in our principal risk register, and if the risk mitigation strategy is adequate. So various aspects of how risk-related questions can be posed to you. Now remember, when you get such questions, how would you approach these kind of questions? Always be specific relating to the impact on Kwirtmak. Specific, not generic points. Generic commentary will not give you a good mark. So for an example, for the short-term actions, you can talk about specific actions that should be taken if a risk is realized within the next 24 to 72 hours. Now, this will be different to what you will do within the next 30 days and the next 12 months. So, immediate actions might be, for an example, if you're talking about a supply-related risk, you might talk about, first of all, understanding this risk, understanding what has happened, what is the disruption. So, that is the first step. Immediately, you need to assess the situation. That is what you will do immediately. Understand the impact, understand the disruption, understand the quick alternatives to handle the situation. And, of course, communicating it. Longer term, you identify why the risk. So for a longer term recommendation, you identify the reasons. You address why the risk materialized. What was the underlying reasons? And what structural changes are needed? And that's what you would focus on in the second part of your answer if you're talking about longer term or mid-term strategy. So for an example, if the failure was due to maybe we used only a single supplier, maybe we need to source more suppliers. Maybe specific materials, we need to look for alternatives. We need to maybe have buffer stock. So all of this comes under the secondary aspects, what to do to prevent it from happening in the future. So our first should be immediately what we need to do to come to minimize impact. So the first step is minimization of impact. Second step should be long-term strategy. Long-term strategy to deal with it. Now, a student who simply gives, oh, we should hire a new supplier, and these are the immediate actions, this shows a lack of strategic insight. Because you're not really assessing the fact that this is not something you can do overnight. Right? So that's why commercially sound judgment, commercially sound strategy is important. Now, assuming the risk is cybersecurity, one of the key risks in your pre-scenes. So we have a lot of cybersecurity related data from our clients. We hold customer computer-aided design files that are very commercially sensitive. So these are all aspects that are very sensitive. These represents years of investment of customer data in our hands. So we need to talk about specific actions if this was to happen. What are the specific actions, response we must take? We must be specific, and we should talk about what we should prioritize. So we'll focus on, first of all, maybe things like immediate action. So again, immediately what can we do to prevent further spread? Immediate response, immediate communication. So here you come under communicate, prevent further spread, activate incident response plan. Then you have the secondary actions, which are governance follow-ups. Now, this is where we strengthen our risk register, we come up with controls, we have the audit committee commission to check these, we have a new role established to look into this risk more in a more keen and aware manner, security awareness training. Now, that's the secondary aspect. So you can see whatever risk, the actions have to be aligned in a time-sensitive fashion. So now we can look at business valuation related questions. Now, for an instance, you have a question relating to an acquirer has made an approach to Kwirtmak at a stated share price. Is this a fair reflection of our value? Advise the board. Or we might be considering acquiring a company and certain financial information is provided, and you need to think of the appropriate range of values we should be willing to pay. Or our share price has fallen significantly. A major shareholder is questioning whether the board is doing enough to restore our value. How should we, or how should the CFO respond? So you are having to deal with these questions. Now remember, if you are asked to how to approach a valuation in a practical way, how you're going to deal with it, repeating myself again, commercial judgment. So to talk about which valuation is appropriate, you need to know the range of valuations, need to know the limitations of each method, and based on that, based on the specific situation we are in, so this might be both pre-seen information and new unseen information in your mock or in your exam, you need to make a judgment. So for an example, if asked whether maybe a stated acquisition price is fair, the first thing is to look at multiple approaches and explain the range. So generally, the book value, or we can say the asset-based value, forms a floor or a minimum value because it's a historical cost of assets. We are a going concern business, we generate revenue, we have customer relationships, we have a network of technical knowledge, reputation. So we can't just go for our asset value, and that too our historical asset value. So that will be the base for the price, that a minimum. But then to express value, the aspect of future earnings, we now have to consider aspects such as what is our future, what is our earning potential, what will be our earnings. We'll look at both of these, or we'll look at these, and then we will talk about the approximate value. Again, how the board narrates our revenue. The decline will also comment on what our value will be. So remember, asset-based will form a lower floor, whereas maybe cash flow, or we can say earnings-based, will form a upper floor. So depending on the value we offer, we'll either be closer to the upper or the lower floor. So remember also that our beta plays a crucial role here. How? Because the beta shows how volatile or our perceived volatility. So what do we need to do as a business? We need to diversify. We need to look at ways to enhance our value, to reduce our beta. If we don't do this, our present value of future earnings will be less. That means our upper flow might be low in terms of value. That's something to consider, and we might be more susceptible to a takeover. So we need to always talk about aspects in terms of link our strategic performance and our perceived shareholder value. Now, if an acquisition price is there, how should the board negotiate? So remember, the price floor, the lower value and the upper value is not the only two determinants. You will have other factors, and that is one main factor is negotiation plays a crucial role at whatever price that's paid, whether we are acquiring a company or they are trying to acquire us. So the maximum price we should be willing to pay is the target is the present values of synergies. But negotiation comes into play. We need to be skeptical about the synergies because synergies might or might not realize. So especially when it comes to revenue synergies, we need to be skeptical. We need to be very cautious. We need to apply a higher discount rate, taking cost into account, taking uncertainties into account, the risk of execution into account. We need to always talk about negotiation. So, effective negotiation is important in deciding what the valuation will be in valuation. So actually this is not upper floor. This we can call this actually more appropriately the upper limit, I would say, because floor is lower, the upper limit, or we can call it the ceiling we are willing to pay. Evaluating different strategic options. So again, in your exam, you will be given different strategic options. It's definitely something, a new strategic opportunity or even a threat. And you need to evaluate how we should respond. Maybe a strategic direction. Again, evaluate. Then maybe evaluating between what we should prioritize in terms of future growth, whether we should enter this or that. You're in the senior management position. These are obvious things you need to be prepared for. So remember, your answer cannot just be stating the pros, the cons, but rather you should follow an integrated assessment of whether the option makes sense given our current situation. What are we good at? What is our current financial constraints? What is our competitive position? And based on that, what we can do. So you need to critically ask the question whether this option will make us more competitive in the market, whether we can execute it, whether we have the resources. So basically, here we're talking about the SAF framework in a sense. Is it suitable for us? So is it a good strategic fit for us? Can we really execute it? Then things like timing. Is it the right time? What are the commercial risks of it? So is it suitable? Will our shareholders and stakeholders accept it? Do we have feasibility, technical, financial, operational feasibility? So it will differ based on the option, the strategy we are talking about. It will really differ. Now, again, we might have questions relating to how we will deal with our competitive position with Bresco. Their revenue risers, ours contracts, how we would deal with it. So whatever strategic option we choose should always focus on closing this gap of revenue we have with them. Something that will improve our revenue. We need to talk about pricing, sales team, quality, customer service responsiveness to reduce the divergence. So maybe we need to look at if it's an issue with these teams, how do we handle this? Or if it's some technological gap, again, how can we quickly develop this technology to again reduce the gap in revenue? So this is a key area. Even if it's not a subtask, this should always be in the back of your head. That would be always, how can we reduce this divergence? How can we reduce the revenue divergence is a key thing we need to ask ourselves.
And that's a wrap on today's free video. I hope this has given you a really solid foundation. You now understand the industry, the company, you know your role, you know how this exam looks like, and you've seen how to approach some of the toughest question types at the strategic level. But I want to say something really important before you close this video. Watching is a great start, but watching alone will not pass the SCS. The students who pass are the ones who practice. They write answers, they get feedback, they learn what a level 3 response actually looks like. And they do it again and again until it becomes second nature. The SCS is not a knowledge test, it's a skills test. And skills only develop through doing. So don't let this video be the end of your prep. Let this be the beginning. What you've seen today is part 1 of Nisha's full analysis of pre-scene. There are few more parts covering the board, the risk, sustainability, the news stories, the full financial statements, ratio analysis, and the competitor benchmarking against Bresco. And beyond pre-scene analysis, there are practice tasks, mocks exams, and expert feedback on your writing. So you're not just consuming content, you are actually building the skill. On screen right now, you can see our 4 course options: Essential, Advanced, Master, and Ultimate, starting from £139. Whether you want to self-study with expert materials or have Nisha personally mark your mocks and guide you through one-on-one Zoom sessions, there's a package that fits where you are right now. The link is in the description. Go and have a look. And if you have any questions, just drop them in the comments or reach directly to us. Good luck with your prep, and remember, you've got this.